consent?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Everyone can rise to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Trustee Gray.
Present.
Trustee Holtz.
Present.
Trustee Rogers.
Present.
Trustee Suisse.
Present.
Trustee Pesnino.
Present.
Trustee Varian.
Present.
Mayor Eaton.
Present. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from June 26, 2019 Village Board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Okay. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of July 10th, 2019 Village Board meeting?
I so moved.
Squeeze. Second. Pesmino. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the executive session minutes of the July 10th, 2019 executive session meeting?
So moved.
Trustee Rogers.
Second.
Trustee Gray. Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve minutes of the August 14th, 2019 Village Board meeting?
So moved.
Trustee Berrien,
I'll second.
Trustee Suisse, discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next will be reports and communications from the mayor and other officers. I'll start off with join the village in celebrating the grand opening of the Active Core at Heritage Park this Saturday, September 14th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Enjoy games, crafts, scavenger hunt, and more. Try out our new sports courts and game area with their gaming supplies courtesy of the village. Adults and teens will be able to try their new skills at the new challenge course, run the entire course, and set your initial time. We will also have live music and food options available for purchase. I won't be rude. We'll go to the trustees. We'll start out with Trustee Gray first.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on behalf of the Homerfest Committee, I have nothing new to report other than the fact that we are continuing to work, and we will work at our next meeting on an item that we're going to bring before the board on September 25th during a committee of the whole, where we're going to discuss any future use of the property like we did this past year, how we can possibly improve upon it, make it better for the residents. We specifically want to talk about how we can mitigate the rain and flooding issue that we had in the tent area. So hopefully we'll have a good, robust conversation that will be a committee of the whole. So we're going to invite the entire committee fest as well as the board, and Trita Architecture will be here as well.
That sounds good.
That concludes my report.
Thank you. Trustee Holtz.
No report.
Thank you. Trustee Berrien.
Just quickly on behalf of Community and Economic Development, just a reminder of two upcoming ribbon cuttings on September 25th, 4 o'clock and 4:30. The first one will be Ichiban Ramen, 144th and Bell, and the second will be Tavern in the Glen, 158th and Bell. Just want to remind everybody to attend the ribbon cutting and also let everybody know that those businesses are currently open. And thank them for choosing Homerfest. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Trustee Rogers.
No report.
Thank you. Trustee Pesmino.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Trustee Suisse.
I have no report, Mayor.
Thank you. Village clerk.
No report.
Village attorney.
No report, Your Honor.
Public safety.
Just real quick one, Your Honor. 18 years ago today, just a reminder of the September 11th attacks where 2,977 people died this day. So something we can't forget about. I just want to let the board and the public know that 2 of us that are assigned up here to Homer Glen itself are also part of the honor guard. So we represented the Sheriff's Department, but also the village in a ceremony held this morning at Joliet Junior College that they do every year. So it was an honor for us to not only honor the fallen, but to represent our department, the county, and especially the village of Homer Glen there. And that's my report.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Yes, sir.
Village manager.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to remind everyone that our fall/winter newsletter went out last week in the local newspapers as an insert. We also have extra copies here as well for distribution to our residents and our businesses. And so I just want to make sure you're aware of that. And then we also have 2 positions that we just published on our website. We have a part-time human resources manager that's published and posted, and we also have our part-time seasonal winter maintenance worker as well. And if anyone's interested in that, they can go on our website for both of those postings.
Okay, thank you. Next will be public comment. Tom and Bev Petratus, did you both want to speak, or?
Well, I'm going to speak. No, I won't speak. But 150-56 Eagle Ridge Drive, the corner. I'm having a hard time with the process of how you do business here. If I have to put a fence in, I have to come to you and ask you and pay a permit fee for you to approve it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Reciprocation to the homeowner. The path went in on 151st. You border my home. You passed this path on September 12th of last year. Mr. Gray, you came out on the 16th to tell me about it. You approved the dollars on 10/10. The problem I have, why wasn't there a public hearing on it? Why? I guess what I'm getting at is, why wasn't I notified? I lived in the city of Chicago. Anything that was done within 500 feet of your property, you always got a registered letter. So I guess what I'm trying to say here, George, is the last thing that I had given to me was August 17th of 2017. There's nothing on there. So you had a committee meeting to say, let's put a path in. Not only did you not provide any safety measures for it, where do all the people enter now? Let me give you a little hint. My driveway. Go take a look and see what you did. See what you approved. And the problem I have with it, I don't have a problem with the bike path. But you ruined my privacy. I had 25-year-old trees there. Granted, they weren't on my property, but they provided privacy. They put sound abatement. Nothing included in it. We had a talk prior, if you remember, on my driveway. And you said nothing was in the works for there.
Well,
Can you see how disappointed I am, sir?
Yeah, I do. And there were no plans at that point.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, everybody, you assume everybody's pretty happy with what's going on with this park. I want to remind you that most of the people on Eagle Ridge Drive and Innisbrook Drive bought because it was a golf course. Most of us paid a premium. To not be included, I didn't sign up for a bike path, but it would have been nice if you would have provided some security for me, not with all the kids going to cross my grass. That's number one. Number two, you put nothing in for safety. Nothing. I was at the last safety meeting. This past meeting was canceled. So that was a little over 4 weeks ago. Has anything been, I've got pictures of the electrical pole getting hit by somebody doing 75 miles an hour that a Will County police officer told me that was estimated to go. I've got a picture with a power line down. You know where that power line was laying? On your bike path. So I guess what I'm getting at is the rush to put stuff in without the oversight. Where is the due diligence? That is my question.
Well, the due diligence was put out there for us to make sure that a path was put in so they weren't crossing, they weren't in dangerous area trying to do it with a ditch there. So they did decide to put in a path, which the path has been in process since we started doing all of them around there. I'm sorry that they didn't give you any notifications that was going there. And as for the trees and as for the bushes, doesn't mean we can't take care of something and put something.
Well, I would appreciate it in the effort. And the truth of it is, do something. I've got pictures. I will send you the pictures. Because the first person that gets killed there, it's on your heads. And that's the truth. What you fail to realize, you've got a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. I'll just give you the last three that I know. July 4th, July 6th, 2 overturned cars 150 feet from my driveway. This past Tuesday, major accident. The woman sent to the hospital because she's a friend of mine. Guys, safety has to be included around it. We need to lower the speed limits. We need to do something. I'll take anything. The previous owner of my residence used to sit out with a radar gun. And in the 13 years I've been here, we have done nothing. Nothing. People speed in there. The electrical pole was one example. The Northern Illinois gas main was hit for 3.5 hours. My neighbor's fence burned. This is what happens here. And I'm just saying, when you are putting something in around somebody's property, do some due diligence and knock on the door and say, hey, Tom, like me, Tom, I'll talk to you all day. I will.
I know.
Mayor, can I make a comment?
Thank you.
I did go out and see the gentleman at his house, and it was before the meeting because I specifically told you the date it was coming up on our agenda, and I asked you if you'd like to comment to please come in and make sure that you sign in.
You voted on September 12th. I sent you an email.
That was when you sent me an email.
No. I sent you an email on September 16th. I still have it.
Right, but I came to your house before that. That's how you had my email. I gave you my card. I don't want to argue with you. What I wanted to say was that I told the gentleman that the berm was going to be coming down, that it was in the public right of way. He seemed to understand that. He said he hadn't been doing any improvements to that for the past year, and I said, no, it was just an opportunity for him, if he was going to be doing any landscaping in his yard, that he might want to do it on the inside of the fence to mitigate the fact that there'd be, the loss of the berm. I also told him at the time that pretty much anything in the berm was, if he wanted to take it and put it in his yard, he said it was kind of old and he didn't really want to transplant it. At the same time, I was also talking with other residents in the neighborhood, which happens to be my neighborhood. I'm not making any statement of that. It is my neighborhood as well, that our sign is going to be coming down. So I have, I was emailing those gentlemen as well and making sure that everybody was informed. I also had Director Selmovich on that email chain, as well as our former village manager, or interim village manager at the time. When I went out there, though, there was ample opportunity to like I said, to let everybody know, to come forward and say, hey, if you want to make public comment, we're going to be talking about this. That never materialized.
When was the comment supposed to be made, sir?
Pardon?
When? You didn't say nothing to the fact of that.
I told you it was going to be on our agenda.
I have got proof of an email I sent to you on the 16th, sir.
Yes.
The 16th.
It's public comment. It's not an argument back and forth.
So I just wanted to address the fact that the timeline is questionable to begin with, because I was out there before our vote, and actually we didn't even vote at that meeting. We only brought it under advisement, I believe, at that meeting. We actually voted at a subsequent meeting to approve that. So.
And I do remember the discussion on the signs because they thought they were going to lose it. So, but there too, I don't know the specific dates.
That was on the 26th, because I read it
The
today.
16th, though, we did not vote to approve the paths. We talked about the...
No, the 16th was a Sunday when you came out to talk to me. I'm correcting the record. The 12th is when you went into executive session to do whatever you did to put this path in.
We don't do that in executive session.
Yeah, well, it's in your minutes.
No, that's not what happened.
It's in your minutes, I wrote it down. So that's where it would be different.
They can't approve it in the executive session, that has to be approved.
Okay, well then, I went and looked over every meeting that you have on your website, and nothing is in there. When you approved it. The only thing in there is on, is on the 10th, that the 95, short of $10,000 to approve for the candidate. That's what was in there. So, but, besides the point,
Sir, don't do that.
besides the point, sir, really? Can't you be a good neighbor and stop by? You drive past my house how many times a day,
I
sir?
did stop at your house. I gave you my card. You had my cell number and my email.
And I emailed you. So I called in home. I get no response. I emailed you, George. I get no response. Just saying.
Flyers that we sent out about trail access, did that include Eagle Ridge?
No.
Was that South Brooklyn?
Right.
All right, as for the landscaping, I'll discuss it with the board to see if they'll replace anything that's there. But the rest of it is just the safety of the people going up and down the street, and that's why they put the path there, that's why they put a fence there.
Okay. Will you please look at getting the people on bikes off my driveway? That's all I'm asking for, too. You stop.
Just see what's going on.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
Deb, did you have anything to say or no? Okay, next one, should be Sarvadas Kaminsky.
I'm sorry, 1 second, please. Again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Come back by the next meeting. We want to tell a little bit my opinion and about our last 2 meetings. We have recorded minutes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry for my language, I'm not very well, but if you have any questions, don't understand what you want to say, ask me again, I will try to repeat. All right, and meeting on September 5th, which one was rescheduled 2 weeks early about the HWM truck maintenance in the property 15761 Eco Drive. Gentleman who wants to run a new business and new business owner at this property, Unit A, had blamed me about I was making a pressure to neighbors next to a wall, people who lives over there. I went to apologize to people if I made any, something bad to them. I want to tell all those stories, what happened, real quick and clear. I met person named Dana 13029 before August 15 meeting to ask is she knows about the meeting about the changing zoning and truck repair business coming, truck sales business coming in next, here backyards, that's it. Sorry again from English. She said she doesn't know anything, I just bring email, there is a meeting date, and it's not automobile repair and maintenance business coming. There is a semi-trucks business coming, and you can see it in the backyard. Nothing else. I spoke it here 2 minutes. Second visit was before September 5th, because everybody knows meeting's supposed to be on September 19th or 18th for same case, but it was rescheduled 2 weeks early. I get notice 2 days before about it. It was rescheduled. It's the same situation. I want to stop and talk to the neighbors. Are we coming in a meeting? Nothing else. I was maybe a little bit too late because my wife stopped at 6 o'clock I stopped 8:30 after I finished the work. Door was open, lights was on. I never stepped in a house or something. I just knocked on the door. I asked, "Do you know it's a meeting?" She said, "No, I don't know." She took a paper from me. It's done. And if you listen minutes on the September 5th meeting, the guy was blaming me, lying about all situations. Next visit was 13019 to Granberg, to next. It's 4 houses next to it. I saw this person one time for 2 minutes. She's my client. I just give it like a notice. Meeting is on August 15th. That's it. Never saw the people again. 13035 Bramble Road. I never met those people because we never home. 13043, I don't know this gentleman's name. I talked with him, same thing. Do you know about a meeting? Coming new business, new owner of a business and a property. He's going to do truck repairs, truck sales. You want to join the meeting? That's it. And he starts asking me questions. What kind of business? What is it like? How Dan Pugh doing? Because he knows Dan Pugh Sr. So Dan Pugh Sr. died 2 years ago. Conversation was about 5 minutes. And he said, "Oh yeah, it's like a lot of trouble with that. I don't want to have any more those trucks, like smoke going from diesel trucks, everything. I want to go and complain to a village." That's it. Nothing else. I said, "Sir." Oh, I said, I cannot be in a meeting. I want to give you a letter with my complaints. I said, "I cannot take any letters. You can go in a meeting and leave it or give it to your neighbors." Next day, this gentleman coming to my shop and telling me a story. He said, "After you start giving to me information, I want to go speak with Mr. Rigi in the village to leave a complaint about, I don't like that, I don't want to see this, because we have the same situation a long time ago. Falling fence, mess around, smoke from the trucks, because trucks is idling, in the winter time is idling all night when it's cold." And he starts telling me a story after like visiting Mr. Rigi and the complaints. Less like in 2 hours, Mr. Hyder, new owner of a business, shows up by his door, knowing his name, last name, knocking on the door and talking with his wife. He's a very good guy, he's very quiet, he does very nice business, you will never hear anything about it. And I would like to village board to ask those neighbors, if it's possible, maybe it's not possible, come back to next meeting on September 25th, because everybody talking, everything is recorded, to repeat everything, what we really think about it, without the pressure. On the first meeting, Heider mentioned how those people came in over here. I just tried to say it's a public meeting and everybody's supposed to get notices. And I asked like a few neighbors around our business, because we're friends, 13 years in the business, we communicate each other, and no one receives any mails or notifications. And that small sign, 1 feet by 12 inches by 18 inches, I believe it's like, it's nothing for a special use permit request and announcement about the meetings.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to interrupt you. You've been addressing the board for over 10 minutes. I'm the village manager. I spoke to your wife on the phone as well last week.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you saying like a lady, Katie?
Carrie, yes.
Carrie, oh, I'm
So your public comment should be limited to 3 minutes.
No.
And you've been over.
I'm sorry.
Please don't.
You stopping me to talk
Yeah.
through
Okay,
about-
sir, she said you have 3 minutes of public comment, 3.
So I'm going to make some
Okay.
clarifications to the village board so they understand what this gentleman was talking about. There is a pending special use approval that is going through the public hearing process, which the board is aware of. They have been in planning commission for the last 2 meetings of the planning commission. All the public notifications required by state law were met. So the notifications were made, the legal notices were made, the signs were made. We have verified that those things have done. So the things that he's accusing the petitioner or my staff of doing is not accurate. Secondly, there are some personal conflicts between this gentleman and the petitioner.
I would like to talk about the
Please.
She speaks.
Yes, if I may, Mayor, sir, with all due respect, you have to let her finish, okay? They will give you your due time, but let her speak. Thank
So
you.
my staff has been extremely accommodating to listen and meet with this gentleman and his wife to talk about the concerns they have. There's a zoning issue and there's a property maintenance issue. And actually the property maintenance issue is separate from the zoning case that is currently still going through the public hearing process. That decision on that special use that the petitioner has requested of the existing business that's operating, which is a neighbor to this gentleman, will be before you on September 25th for a final vote for the village board. That would be the appropriate time to have this discussion, not under a 3-minute limit of public comment tonight. And that way also the petitioner will be present there as well to be able to answer any questions that the village board has.
And this will be before the planning commission.
It already did go.
But I mean, it's not going back there.
No, it went twice. It went to the first meeting, it was tabled.
Right.
And they went back on September 5th, which was last Thursday, with a recommendation from the planning commission, which we then voted on by this board on September 25th. And that is a proper venue to have this type of conversation so that the petitioner can be present here as well. As well as Eric, our attorney, village attorney, has also had conversations as well regarding this particular item.
All right. Yes.
You said there's going to be 2 issues, the zoning issue and the property maintenance issue?
Yeah, so what's before the board on September 25th will be a vote on the special use that's being requested. There's a separate issue. We received a zoning complaint, a property maintenance complaint on some of the things that were happening out there on this particular piece of property. Some of them were legitimate. Mr. Baber sent his staff out there. They did an inspection. They wrote out what the violations were. And quite frankly, this gentleman had violations as well. And so there's a little bit of a tit for tat going on here. And so what we've been working through on what the property maintenance violations are to make sure those things are cleaned up, which really doesn't really have anything to do with the legal zoning case. However, there are certain conditions that the planning commission has imposed as part of the special use approvals, like buffering and landscaping requirements, that they have asked the petitioner to do, and he's agreed to do to address those concerns. You'll see all that on the 25th in your packet.
All right, so this discussion basically for right now, we know you have an issue, but it's going to be discussed the 25th of this month.
It's not everything true with what the lady says. And I want to say about that call to my wife and talking about some personal problems she knows. Can you tell us, everybody, what you know about the personal problems?
Okay. All right. Well, this will come before the board on the 25th of August, or September.
I would like to know.
You'll find out everything on the 25th. You'll have the opportunity to speak and questions asked, and you'll have to
No,
answer.
she doesn't mention it about that personal problems between me, owner, and new owner of a business. I would like to know and ask right now, how do you know about the
This is not the
existing
venue for
problems?
this.
Yeah, this is not the place to discuss it. This is public comment, so.
So it was mentioned about it, and it's making like
Come on, sir.
pressure and different mind for all board members. What's exactly is going on? And I cannot finish my 2 minutes.
You've had probably 20 minutes right now.
Makes more sense, yeah. Come
All
on.
right, so that's it for public comment. Next, all matters listed under the consent agenda are considered routine by the village board and will be enacted by one motion. Is there a motion to approve the following items? There's 6 of them. The accounts payable for the period of August 30th, 2019 through September 12th, 2019 in the amount of $129,323.43. Number 2, the Village of Homer Glen's July legal bills from Only Silverman and Cross, LLC, in the amount of $5,523.75. Number 3, pay estimate number 10 from Integral Construction, Inc. for the active core project at Heritage Park in the amount of $116,567. Pay estimate number 9 from Austin Tyler Construction, Inc. for Phase 1 of the Heritage Project in the amount of $62,462.24. Number 5, pay estimate number 10 from Austin Tyler Construction, Inc. for the Fittyman Creek Sanitary Sewer in the amount of $171,634.89. And 6, pay estimate number 1 from D Construction for the 151st Street Bike Trail Project in the amount of $100,878.05. Is there a motion? Oh, yeah.
So moved.
Trustee Varian,
Second.
trustee Pedramino. Discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Holtz? Aye. Trustee Rogers?
Aye.
Trustee Suisse?
Aye.
Trustee Varian?
Aye.
Trustee Pedramino?
Aye.
Trustee Gray?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next is workshop item. Village manager, Terry Farley, will discuss recreational cannabis legalization.
Mr. Mayor and the Village Board, tonight we're going to have a workshop on the recent state statutes and laws that went into effect this past summer. I have requested Stuart Weiss to from Holland tonight. He is an attorney in the Chicago area who specializes in this particular subject. We've had the opportunity to see similar presentations that he's done for other communities in the Chicago region and other associations. So this is, tonight is to share what the current state law says, what the options are before local home rule municipalities, and then to answer any questions that any of the village board may have as it relates to the recent changes in state law. And then, obviously, no decision will be made tonight. This is really just about educating and providing feedback and answering questions that the village board has as they determine what direction, if any, they want to go as it relates to these changes. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Stu and let him do his presentation.
Thank you very much for having me out tonight. Tonight I'm going to be giving you a review of the provisions of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, and then specifically focusing on the extent of local authority. I've been giving presentations to a number of Hollandanites, general council clients, and then to a number of, as the manager said, councils of government, and also organizations like the IML. Although I've been credited as an expert in this, I was just the guy who read the bill first. But that's not exactly true. I read earlier versions of the bill and I talked to the sponsors. This is something that we saw coming down for our municipal clients, and I took an interest in it, started speaking to the folks in the General Assembly who were getting out in front of this issue, and it was something that I knew was going to be a concern to a lot of municipalities. The good news tonight is that although we're seeing a very large change in the law in Illinois, a lot has been left to it, which is often not the case when Springfield takes drastic actions. More often than not, they make decisions for municipalities and don't leave us a lot of wiggle room. So the good news tonight is that when all is said and done, you're going to have a lot of say in what happens in Homer Glen come January 1st. And whatever your decision is, as I say, every time I go in and do one of these presentations, I don't know what the tenor, the opinions, or the backgrounds of people are going to be, and sometimes they don't know it themselves until they start talking about it. So, so whatever you want to do, you're going to have a lot of options. Okay, so a quick review. The Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, this was passed on the last day of the general session. It was on a Friday. I think that they did extend a little bit into the weekend, but the last official day of the general session. It was signed by Governor Pritzker on June 25th. There was a pretty significant delay in between passage and signing because everyone in Springfield was scrambling then to figure out how they were going to write rules, what the bill meant, and they're still figuring that out. Some key components of this, and these are the things that are kind of out of your hands. So as of January 1st, legalization of adult possession and use of cannabis for recreational purposes. The model here is basically liquor, that if you're over the age of 21, you'll be able to legally purchase, possess, and use cannabis in Illinois. And we're going to get into some discussion about where it's actually going to be legal and where it's not to use. There's going to be a rapid but controlled expansion of cultivation centers and dispensaries. So there are currently 56 retail locations in Illinois where persons who are participating in the medical cannabis program can buy cannabis. That is going to expand, probably not as fast as some of the legislative sponsors had originally hoped. There are a lot of communities that are preemptively getting out ahead of this and saying that they would like to either wait and see or they would not like to have this in their communities. And as we talk about, that's completely within their power. But there are communities that are welcoming this. So you are going to see an expansion beyond those 56 existing dispensaries. There's going to be new types of cannabis businesses. Craft growers, which are a smaller, kind of a smaller operation that will be actually growing the product. Processors, infusers, and transporters. These are different components of a supply chain of an industry that has a surprising variety of product. If there's a way to consume something, cannabis has been turned into it. Everything from vape pens, which are obviously in the news themselves, to edibles like gummies, chocolates, cookies. And so there's a lot of, I guess we can call it ingenuity in how the product is actually being packaged. Transporters, there will be specific transportation companies that will be handling the movement of this product around the state. There's going to be a whole raft of state and local taxation. There's some other aspects to it, including the mass expungement of minor violations of the Cannabis Control Act. If someone has on a criminal record a possession charge of under 30 grams or some equivalent misdemeanor charges, they will have the opportunity to have those expunged. That's something that really doesn't impact you guys. That's going to be handled at the state level through the ISP and then through counties, state's attorneys. Another aspect that is kind of important to talk about is that the medical cannabis law was also amended at the end of the general session, and it is expanding the number of qualifying conditions. Illinois has had access to medical cannabis since 2013. It's been a relatively small program. Only at the time of earlier this summer, there were about 46,000 registered qualifying patients who were actively using the system. That's not a lot in a state of 12 million people. Part of the reason for that is that Illinois had one of the tightest regulations on the types of conditions that someone could apply for a medical card for. This has been broadened to include things like autism, anorexia nervosa, PTSD, and it also changes who can actually prescribe this. One of the most common questions I get is, well, if recreational is coming in and anyone over the age of 21 can buy it legally, why would you still continue to have a medical program? The complex answer is that no state that has actually ever had medical and then adopted recreational has completely gotten rid of their medical program. Some people prefer to stay under that. They prefer the treatment they get. In Illinois, the very simple answer is that people who are buying it as a medical product, they'll get the same product, they'll be charged at a much lower tax rate. They'll be purchasing it basically as a pharmaceutical rather than a recreational product. If there are any questions along the line, I'm happy to take them at the end. If I'm saying something that's not clear, you can stop me. This presentation usually takes about 25 minutes. It can drag on to an hour and a half. I could be here all night because I know way too much about this stuff. So please, if you you can stop at any time if you have any questions.
Does anyone have any questions right now?
Yes, the one I got about the why having the medical in addition to.
Yeah, and when we get to the tax level, you'll see how significant that difference is actually. So here's the timing. The act did become effective immediately upon the governor's signature. That doesn't mean that you can buy or consume cannabis. I ride the L most days in the city. A lot of people on the L have not gotten that memo. You're not actually going to be allowed to buy and consume cannabis until it is legally for sale through licensed dispensaries as of January 1st. The act is effective right now because a lot of government agencies are now going through the process of rulemaking. Places like the Illinois Department of Finance and Professional Regulation, the Illinois State Police, the Department of Agriculture, all these agencies are working diligently. I was going to say struggling, but they're working diligently to get up to speed to deal with a massive scaling up of this industry. As I said, you've got 56 existing dispensaries. Those 56 existing dispensaries have the opportunity to apply for what is called an early approval license. So those locations will, as of January 1st, if approved by the Department of Finance and Professional Regulation, be able to open their doors to everyone over the age of 21 as of January 1st. You guys do not have a dispensary currently, so that doesn't affect you. What it does affect, though, is that these 56 licensed dispensaries, each one of them has the opportunity to apply for a secondary site location. And what that means is these businesses are known by the state, they're licensed, they're monitored and regulated by the state, and the state is entrusting that those dispensaries know how to do this business, so they'll be able to open up a second location somewhere within the same Bureau of Labor Statistics area, which I assume you guys are still in the Chicago, Naperville, Elgin BLS. If you're not, then okay, yeah. So any of the probably about 2/3 of those 56 are in that BLS could conceivably locate anywhere within there and could come knocking on the door of your community development department. So the potential day one retail market is 112 dispensaries statewide. The narrowing of communities that are welcoming this calls into question whether that number will actually be hit. Nevertheless, after that, there's going to be a whole other wave of licenses that will be issued by the Department of Finance and Professional Regulation. 75 to be issued in 2020. Those will be conditional licenses where the state looks at them, says, you look like a legitimate business, we've reviewed your security plans, we've reviewed your financing, we've reviewed your inventory control knowledge, and you have 180 days now to go out and find a location. So that's another group of potential licensees who may be looking to locate in Homer Glen. Okay, so I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly, but there's a lot of information here. I'm going to talk about what's going to be allowed, what's going to be prohibited, what's going to be taxed, and then most importantly, what is left up to local authority. And I know that Homer Glen is a home rule community. All of this, it doesn't really matter because this is granted regardless of home rule status. So what will be allowed? Adult recreation possession and use. There are possession limits as to what a person can go in and buy. Non-residents are only allowed half of these amounts. So if someone is coming from Indiana or Wisconsin or Iowa, they'll only be able to buy half of what an Illinois resident would be able to buy. And there, as I said, there's going to be the licensed commercial sale of leaf, edibles, and tested derivatives. There's going to be this product is going to be distributed in many different forms. And then there was one aspect which was a little bit surprising. We were told during the drafting of this bill that there would be no pot cafes, no coffee shops with on-premises consumption. At the very last minute, 3 lines were added to a 600-page bill that more or less said that on-premises consumption will be allowed subject to local control and approval. That's pretty ambiguous. It doesn't give us a lot of guidance. The advice that we've given is that that means that it is completely up to you whether you as a municipality would want to allow that. There's also a kind of a practical issue about on-premises consumption, which I discovered when I spoke to the person who's in charge of all cannabis business licensing for the city of Denver, They've allowed that type of business now for 3 years. There is a grand total of 1 business in the city of Denver that allows on-premises consumption. And the simple reason is, for those of you who are familiar with the operations of liquor licenses, there is no such thing as dram shop insurance for cannabis. So a business that was to allow someone to consume cannabis on their premises, if that person overconsumed, went out, caused an accident, caused harm to themselves, there is no kind of financial legal liability protection backstop that we have with dram shop insurance. And so that has naturally limited the market for those types of businesses in almost every state where this has been allowed. Okay, what will be prohibited? Dispensaries will not be allowed to be located within 1,500 feet of another dispensary. So you're not going to have these clumping together like mattress stores or like banks or gas stations on every corner. You will not be able to consume in public places, which is defined as any place where a person could reasonably be expected to be observed by others. This does not include within someone's own residence, but could include if someone was sitting on their front porch, or if someone was sitting in a backyard with a low fence and there were kids in the next yard over. The idea is that this is something that can be enjoyed in private, but we do recognize as a state that there are certain negative aspects to it, and so there are greater limits on it than there are even for alcohol. Consumption in close physical proximity to persons under the age of 21. Consumption by smoking, anywhere prohibited by the Smoke-Free Illinois Act. Sale to minors, obviously. Home delivery. This is something that has been very popular in some other states like California where recreation has been legalized. It is not permitted under the Cannabis and Regulation Tax Act, so you will not see cars, little like green Priuses or anything, delivering packages to your friends and neighbors, at least not that. There are also limits on advertising, that you cannot make any medical or health claims, which is kind of funny. I actually visited a dispensary. I don't have a medical card, so I didn't find anything, but it's a medical dispensary. People go in for medical conditions, and they're not allowed to say that it has any medical or health benefits. So it's a little bit interesting in that respect, but that you won't be able to make any of those claims either when this goes out for general consumption. You cannot include images of the cannabis leaf or buds in your advertising. You can't include any imagery that would appeal to minors. I call this the Joe Camel rule, because we all remember how the advertising of cigarettes was more and more constrained over the years that went on, especially anything that would be attractive to kids or teens. And as we've seen, there's the recent controversy about how Juul and other electronic cigarettes have been marketed towards youths. Youth possession and consumption will be prohibited, other than for medical purpose. There are some conditions that youth would be able to have a medical card. That's a very small number of people. So if you don't have a medical card, it's a Class A misdemeanor, and you can get your driver's license yanked until you're 18. Open container. This is one of the things that, in the same way that if the sheriffs pull over someone and they see an open can of beer, even if the person isn't inebriated, you can charge them with an open container violation. Same thing if you see someone who has an open bag of cannabis. All cannabis currently and will be sold in tamper-indicative packaging. So if someone has basically an open bag or something, or a vape pen that has been unsealed, that can be considered an open container for the purposes of a citation. DUI, this has actually not changed. The provisions that are in the Illinois Vehicle Code about impairment were left exactly the same. As you can see, these are very detailed standards that deal with nanograms of THC that are in whole blood or in other bodily substance. And I think that law enforcement rightfully points out that you don't get substances like that in a field test. One of the issues here, and this is something that no one is denying, is that there is no reliable field test currently for cannabis impairment. This is going to be a problem. Unfortunately, this is something that the state has taken out of our hands. I do say that whoever comes up with a reliable field test is going to make a whole lot of money. That has not happened yet. There are some employment issues that are somewhat addressed. Use by firefighters and police prohibited while they're on duty or on call. On call is when such employee is scheduled within at least 24 hours notice by his or her employer to be on standby or otherwise responsible for performing a work-related task. There are some contradictory provisions, which we'd be happy to talk about for a whole other hour at some other meeting, about how to handle a drug-free workplace or a zero-tolerance policy, both of which are explicitly authorized in the statute, but at the same time the statute says you're not allowed to take an adverse action against an employee for using an otherwise legal product. Go reconcile that. It's something that we're hoping will be addressed in a trailer bill. What will be taxed? So this will be one of the highest tax products in the state of Illinois, and as we all know, that's saying a lot. When you add together what I'm kind of calling a lasagna of revenue, the net taxation on retail cannabis will be between 40 and 45% of the purchase price. And it hits at every link in the supply chain. Cultivation, the state takes a 7% tax on wholesale sales from cultivators to, whether it be directly to a dispensary or to kind of one of the intermediate processors. Dispensaries will have a purchaser's excise tax, which will be passed on to the customer. It's on a sliding scale depending on the potency of what they're selling. The counties will have the opportunity to put a 3% tax in incorporated areas. That goes. And then municipalities will have the opportunity to impose their own 3% tax. And wait, there's more. This is all on top of your existing county, state, municipal, regional, RTA, whatever else is already there. And any home rule taxes. Illinois Department of Revenue will collect all these and remit them back with the same expediency that they give you your other taxes, whatever that happens to be this month. I was asked to bring up one note that there is some confusion in the law about if a community does want to impose its own municipal cannabis retailer's occupation tax. The statute says that you have to adopt it by September for it to be, by June to be imposed by September. Now, by June 1st to be imposed by September 1st. Of course, the law didn't pass until June 25th of this year. So a very literal reading of that language would say that you can impose it by June 1st, 2020, and it will then be imposed by September 1st, 2020. What does that leave a community that wants to have this and sell this? That leaves you without 9 months of potential revenue, including probably some very important first few months sales where there's going to be a lot of excitement behind this product. That's another thing that hopefully will be resolved. The IML has done its best, and we've done our best to confirm what the IML has said, that if this is somehow fixed during the veto session, that a good idea would be, if there's any inkling that your community would be interested in having this type of business in your community, any inkling at all, and you would like to collect tax on that, that you could adopt an ordinance before October 1st that says, if we ever decide to allow this type of business, the sale of recreational cannabis would be charged at a rate of, it's up to 3%. You have to do it in 4% increments, and file it with the DOR. And you could go forward and decide not to allow those types of businesses, but you'd have it on the books. Some communities have chosen to take that route. Others, where this has become a contentious issue, have decided that they would rather hear from the public about whether they want this type. They'd rather go through a full public hearing process and not make anything seem like it was a fait accompli. That's a decision that you guys would have to make kind of internally. Okay, where will the revenue go? First, the first cut of the revenue goes to the regulating state agencies. Agriculture, IDFPR, Department of Revenue, ISP, all their costs get paid first. And we can be a little bit cynical about this. One of the things that for every community that has had a dispensary, when I've called them out in meetings where there's been a bunch of local governments around, I've said, how many of you have dispensaries in your communities? A few hands go up. I said, how many of you receive public safety calls or property maintenance calls or any sort of nuisance calls about those? All the hands go down. This is not my personal endorsement of the cannabis industry. What I think is that for this very small pilot program, that the state has actually done a pretty competent job of regulating these facilities. The big question will be, of course, if this industry scales up to potentially 10 times its current size, can that regulation that is effective, regular, and fair, three things we don't normally put together with our state government, can that scale up and remain as effective, regular, and fair? I think it is a good thing that they're providing a dedicated funds for these agencies to scale up, to hire the people they need. When you compare the Department of Finance Professional Regulation or the ISP, they send someone to a dispensary every 3 to 4 weeks. If you ask a local liquor license holder, when they see someone from the Illinois Liquor Commission, it's about every 2 years. So far, this program has worked. That there's dedicated revenues to keep the state at somewhat fighting weight on this, I think is a good thing. The second tranche of funds will go to supporting the expungement, which some of it will actually come back to local law enforcement to deal with your law enforcement records, and the costs will be associated with that. The remainder, there's a whole list of where it's going to go. For local communities, the most important thing is that 8% will be dedicated to come back to municipalities on a per capita fund, a per capita basis, to fund crime prevention, training, interdiction efforts. This will include being able to purchase technology if a reliable field test comes out, but also to train drug recognition experts. This is really the only way that you can do reliable field. It's not field testing, but it's similar to when someone does like a DUI screening, asking someone to touch their nose, observing their behaviors. There's law enforcement training specifically for cannabis on this.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The 8% for the LGDF and the 25% fund grant to the communities negatively impacted, are those going to be to all communities in the state, or is that only the communities that opt to allow sales?
That's evenly distributed. Because the recognition is there, is that someone may buy it one place, but they're not going to just sit there and use it next to where they bought it. Whatever negative impacts there are going to be will cross boundary lines. And so the 8%
will come back.
Yeah, the 25%, there's a whole social equity structure in the bill which goes to grant programs and other things that is going to be targeted more at communities that have had higher either crime rates, higher incarceration rates due to marijuana prohibition. So the 25%, I don't know if you're going to see that as much in kind of the suburban, exurban areas. You'll probably see those much more in kind of the urban areas of the south and west sides of Chicago. But the 8% coming specific law enforcement grants, those are going to be really based on a per capita distribution.
Real quick, I had that same question, but secondarily on the LGDF,
Yeah.
it's restricted on how those dollars can be spent.
Yes, that 8%. But if the 3%, if you do impose your own 3%, so okay, this distribution of percentages, that's all from the state imposed taxes. If you impose the 3% municipal cannabis retailers occupation tax, all that comes back to you, except of that 1.5% of that whole, so not a third of it. Yeah, not 1/3 of it, but 1.5. The state takes an administrative, convenience charge, as they do with all of your other taxes that
But if you're one of the, what seems like the majority of towns so far that opted out, you don't opt out of the 8% LGDF.
No.
But those dollars are restricted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess my question on that would be, I'm going to assume it's not built in, this is an 8% add-on to LGDF.
No, it's 8% basically of what is left. So there's going to be a pot of money that is collected by the state, and then first come the regulating cost, then come the expungement cost, then there is this pot, a smaller pot of money, and it's going to be divvied up like this. This was the fight that was going on when the bill was drafted. How much of it would go to the bill backlog? How much would go to pensions?
Yeah, I guess my concern is if you're a community that opted out, right? So forget about the 3%.
Yeah.
You've opted out. You've got 8% of this revenue going to LGDF. My concern would be that as the budgets are being done, there's a new 8% being dedicated to LGDF. This is restricted where it's not typically restricted.
Right.
But if, and I'd like to think that our lawmakers wouldn't do this,
I think
but
I know
if you
you're
pull
right.
8% out of the back end, we're actually getting hurt in this because we're now 8% of our, whatever that number may be on LGDF, are now restricted on how we can spend those dollars.
I don't think that's not how the bill is not written, that this is like, that this is, when I put that in there, that it basically is distributed in the same way as the LGDF. It's on that same formula. It doesn't actually, it doesn't, I don't know the state's accounting, and it may, simply because that's the way they're doing it, but it is not supposed to take away or in any way diminish what you're getting from the state.
Yeah.
The state's good enough at that already.
Yeah. Well, this would be, I think, a key issue for us as a town that doesn't levy a property tax, municipal property tax, and is therefore even more dependent on our portion of LGDF. If we're talking about something in the 8% that is now somehow restricted versus how we could traditionally spend it, that's where I think it becomes.
It is not intended to actually impair what you're already getting. This is a separate grant specifically for law enforcement and interdiction purposes. So, okay. So here's the kind of the meat of the presentation for you guys. The extent of local authority. The first thing that I put up, home rule is preempted. Usually that's really bad news. Usually that's terrible. And in this case, home rule has been preempted to the extent that you cannot tell your residents that they cannot consume cannabis in their own homes. You cannot set up a checkpoint at your borders and search people and say, did you bring in cannabis into the, in the same way that you couldn't do that for liquor or any other legal product. So here's what you can do. You can outright ban all cannabis businesses by ordinance. So you could pass an ordinance, and it's our opinion that if you're just going to outright ban it, if you're not making a land use determination as to where they're appropriate, that this would not even need to go to a plan commission. You could just say this is not something that we feel is an appropriate aspect of commerce for our municipality. So if that's where you wanted to go, you could put that on your next agenda. And there are some communities that get off of the merry-go-round right there. If you feel that further consideration is required, you can enact reasonable zoning regulations for cannabis businesses that don't conflict with the Act. This is the kind of thing that there are two words here that attorneys love. Reasonable, what's reasonable, and that don't conflict with the Act. So there's certain provisions that say that dispensaries are allowed to be open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Does that mean that we can't restrict the hours of operation? We opine that we absolutely can. Because if you start from the basis that you can ban something outright, you can absolutely have reasonable restrictions on it, and that having more narrow hours of operations is not a conflict. You can require a conditional or a special use. Vijay, what do you call that here? Okay, call it special use. I always say the opposite one from whatever's in your local code when we do these presentations. So you can require that a business, if they want to establishment in Homer Glen that they apply for a special use. Special use, as you know, goes through Plan Commission, has a public hearing, public notice, opportunity to comment from the public, and then when they come back, you can put operational conditions on it and really deter and look at things on a case-by-case basis based on the location. You can, as I mentioned earlier, prohibit, permit, or regulate private businesses that allow on-premises consumption. For the dram shop reason I cited earlier, that's going to be really rare and probably is not going to be an issue that many communities are going to have to deal with. One note, there was a lot of concern about home grow. In the original draft of the bill, there was a provision that said every adult in Illinois could grow 5 plants for their personal use. This is something that law enforcement pushed back. I think they're right to do so against this. Home grow has now been limited to persons who are registered qualified patients in the medical program. So they can have 5 plants in their home, away from public view, not accessible to children, not accessible where someone could just reach through the fence, can't have it behind a chain link fence where everyone can see it. They can have up to 5 plants. You cannot unreasonably prohibit home grow. This is something that we've got some communities that are interested in this, others are going to treat it more as kind of a nuisance property maintenance issue. If you can see that someone has 20 plants through the window wells of their basement and their utility bills have spiked because they have a bunch of grow lights and they're using over 5,000 gallons of water a month, you would have the ability to go in and inspect that property. Okay, so the best place to start this discussion, I think, is where you guys are right now. When medical cannabis was introduced in Illinois, the power to prohibit it was actually taken away from you. The idea was that you had to allow dispensaries somewhere in your village. And there was a policy reason behind this, that if medical cannabis was determined to have a health benefit that was supposed to benefit people who were suffering from certain conditions, that there should be a place in every community where possibly this could be located to serve people with qualifying conditions. So every community was required to find a space for this. Cultivation centers were put in as a special use in the I-1 Industrial District. Dispensaries were put in the I-1 Industrial District as well. Did I capture everything there? Okay, good. Right now, this is what your code says. These are the 2 definitions that you have for cannabis facilities. If someone wanted to come in and do a recreational dispensary, as of they got a secondary site license and they wanted to come into your community tomorrow, your planner would look at this and say, I'm sorry, we have a use, it's defined solely as a medical use, serving medical patients. Is that bulletproof protection that would allow you to basically turn anyone away? I feel pretty confident, yes. Could someone, though, try and make a case of it and say, we are a legal retail business, we sell plants, if you allow a florist, we sell edibles, if you allow bakeries, we should be able to come in by right or permitted use as one of those. Is that a case you probably win? Probably. We're counseling all of our clients that sooner than later, you should come up with clear definitions of what you want, whether it be to prohibit, to allow with very specific restrictions. Okay. These are classes of cannabis business establishments that are actually defined in the Act. And before, under medical, there was either dispensaries or cultivation centers. Cultivation centers were giant industrial agricultural boxes that were supposed to be out in fields with huge air conditioners and HVAC systems and a bunch of grow lights. Most of them are downstate or in very rural areas. And you had dispensaries. With the new law, there are new classes, recognizing that this, as a mature industry, will have a supply chain that has a lot of different components to it. So you're going to have your cultivation centers. You have a new class of cultivation businesses called craft growers, think microbreweries. that you're going to have a smaller entrance to the market that could have between 5,000 to 14,000 square feet of growing space, and that could pop up in an industrial park, that could pop up in a vacant grocery store. And some of these would want to co-locate with a dispensary in the same way that you see breweries with tap rooms, or bottle shops, actually. This would be probably a bottle shop, would be more a better analogy. You're still going to have dispensaries, which are going to be the retail locations. You're going to have processors, which are going to be, these are more of an industrial use, where the processors take cannabis, use solvents to distill out all the active chemicals, reduce it down to something that's kind of like a resin or some sort of liquid, which is then either sold directly to consumers as a concentrate, or then put into edibles, put into topicals, put into any way someone can consume something, somebody's figuring out how to package it that way. And those are the infusers. The infusers are like commercial kitchens. They're going to be people who are taking this ingredient and putting it into different products. So any place that a commercial kitchen might go in, an infuser might be looking to go. Some communities are looking at, although dispensaries are getting a lot of the attention, communities that have disused industrial spaces, that have office parks with a lot of vacancies, they're looking at processors and infusers as kind of opportunities for entrepreneurial ventures that don't generate any retail traffic, that don't have the kind of the secondary effects that people are scared of. So some communities are actually considering these without considering a dispensary. There are two other classes of cannabis business establishments, testing facilities and transporters. Neither of these actually have or maintain large amounts of cannabis on the premises. A testing facility could be basically like a pharmaceutical testing facility or like an underwriter's laboratory. They basically test for potency. They don't keep huge stocks of cannabis. We don't recommend that that needs to be a separately regulated land use. Transporters, these are going to be licensed van lines that will basically probably armored and secured. I don't think that they will have armed guards on them because you get into federal rules with being able to carry a gun when you have a Schedule I drug in your possession. That's a fine intersection right there. But these are going to be basically van lines. If you have a transporter in your community, it's going to be like a van. It's going to be like a trucking yard. They're not going to have cannabis sitting overnight in the yard. We don't recommend that those need to be sold separately either. So there's a number of other communities. If you pick up any of the local papers, the Trib, the Sun-Times, Daily Herald, what have you, you're seeing meetings just like this that are happening across Illinois. And you're seeing a lot of different outcomes here. And village staff actually took this slide and beefed it up. I didn't have near as many of these, so thank you guys. And you have communities, Naperville, LaGrange Park, Lincolnwood, Bloomingdale, Bolingbrook, Frankfort, Glenview, that either have or are on the precipice of taking official action to opt out. You have a number of communities that are still considering or still going through the public hearing process. Northbrook is leaning towards yes. Oswego leaning towards yes. Glencoe leaning towards yes. Des Plaines leaning towards yes. Highland Park leaning towards no. Libertyville leaning towards no. Clarendon Hills opting out. Skokie, Joliet have approved. Chicago has actually not made a decision. We expect to see their first draft to be coming out to their committee, I think, next week, and they're definitely considering allowing this, and really the question is to what extent. And then we see some other communities that have just had workshops like this so far and have not made any decisions or has engaged in significant discussion. Okay, and just to give you a sample of the communities that are deciding to allow this with regulations, to give you a sense of how diverse this is, Skokie decided to make it a permitted use, but only to allow 2 of these, which is kind of interesting. The law specifically allows communities to regulate the time, place, manner, and number. Normally in zoning, you're not allowed to say, we can only have 5 of these types of businesses. You can't say we can only have 5 nail salons in town. Sorry, we can only have 3 mattress stores. That's usually frowned upon, as your planner will tell you. In this case, you could set a hard cap in the same way that many communities set a hard cap on liquor licenses. Skokie has set a cap of 2 dispensaries, but they're a permitted use in, I think, 2 of their districts, and they built in certain operating conditions. So it's almost like an automatic special permit. You can come in, but you have these extra standards that you need to follow. Displays, which is currently going through, it's one of my clients, and we're going to have a lot of fun at the planning and zoning board in this one. We're going to be looking at appropriate zoning for every single class that I mentioned to you previously. They will all be classified likely as conditional uses or special uses under displays parlance. They're going to have to figure out what an appropriate numerical cap will be for just about all of these. And then whether distance requirements should be imposed. If you set big enough distance requirements and you zone these narrowly enough, you don't really need to impose a cap because they end up pushing each other out, and you can only have so many. So one of the issues here is that you almost have too many options. You have a lot of different uses, and if you do want to get into the discussion of allowing these through regulation, you have many different paths you can take. What we try to do with the communities that we're working with is give you a hierarchy of questions to answer. I don't expect that you'll do this tonight. You guys can work on this. We're kind of at your disposal as well as you work through this. But to run through how we're thinking about this when we work with our clients is, do you want to allow or prohibit? Simple question. If prohibit, do you want to prohibit all classes or just dispensaries? If you're going to allow, you must determine the appropriate zoning through a public hearing process. You have to figure out what districts they'd be appropriate in, permitted versus special use. What number do you want to put on them? You want to put a separation requirement greater than what's in the 2 statutes. Like I said, dispensaries under state law must be within no less than 1,500 feet of each other. The Medical Act requires that cultivation centers be separated by no less than 2,500 feet from a number of sensitive uses, including schools, daycares, churches, parks, recreation centers. Honestly, these facilities are kind of smelly. It's a very fragrant plant, even when you're not burning it. It just has a very pungent odor. And then those can also adopt custom distance requirements from the same that you might impose for liquor licenses. From uses like schools, churches. I don't know if that's something that you guys do or if you just follow state law on that. Hours of operation, parking in general. I advise that if you're going to regulate parking, you just look at this, that dispensaries are retail, so use a retail standard. Signage, you can also look at if you have a sign review procedure, forcing these types of businesses to go through a sign or appearance review process. Security and lighting, this is one of the biggest questions that people ask. The statute includes very extensive and detailed restrictions on this, and we expect that there will be state regulations on this as well as the type of cameras that must be included. When I visited a dispensary, there were at least 4 cameras in every room, 1 on each wall, and if there was any sort of kind of break or jog on the wall, there was 1 there, so there was no basically area that wasn't under some type of surveillance. That surveillance is not just closed circuit. It can actually, under law, it must be able to be tapped in through internet feed by an employee of the Department of Finance and Professional Regulation or the ISP. Do I think that either of those departments have someone always watching and just clicking through each of the 56 dispensaries? No, but all those have they're required to store and back up. I believe it's 30 days, it may be less than that, but so the security on these are tighter than what you'd see normally at like a currency exchange. What I'm recommending, rather than putting this all on your staff to figure out what kind of security would be appropriate, I recommend that if someone comes in for a special or conditional use, you ask the business to submit all the application materials that they're giving to the state. That you just say, whatever binders you dropped off for the state to get your license, we need a copy of all that. And if we need more, we go right to get it. On-premises consumption and social use, already talked about this. This is something that's really not going to be impacting a lot of local communities. And then the question of imposing retailer's occupation tax, and talked about the possible deadline, theoretically, that could be happening on October 1st. I just threw a lot at you. I don't know, how the board wants to proceed from here. I'm available for any questions that you might have.
The retailer's occupational tax, so that would apply not just to a dispensary, but the other businesses as well?
No, so it's the other dispensaries that are the other kind of links in the supply chain. There is no retail local tax on that.
There's no retail local tax benefit of having the...
Yeah, so people ask, why should we have that? And I say, property taxes and jobs. And take that for what you will.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. You made several mentions, and it is true that the state has been overly generous in allowing us to have so much feedback and so much control over this with preemption of home rule, the number of locations that we can, we can write that into our code that we're only allowing a certain amount of locations, as well as the taxing. My question is, and you might not know the answer to this, but it's, if the state doesn't get the initial influx of desire from the municipalities, is it possible they're going to come back later on and they're going to stand on top of us and say, you know what, we are not going to allow you to only limit it to 2 locations in a municipality, or we're going to allow, if you decide to pass something that says we're not going to allow retail sales, but we'd like to get the cultivation and we'd like to get the infusing in here, are they going to come in later on with something similar to what they've allowed for the medical, where they allow them 2 retail licenses and say, you know what, now we're going to allow craft growers 2 licenses, and it doesn't even have to be in a municipality where retail is allowed, since it's so regulated. That would be my fear, is if we went in a direction, and I see some of these other communities that have gone in that direction, where they've either gone in an outright ban, or the ones that are lining up saying, we're not really interested in retail sale. The retail sales, obviously, where a line share this taxation is going to come from. And if they get too many in that bucket and not enough in the retail, is the state going to look at that and possibly come back in? So, again, you might not know the answer to that, but everybody else knows that's on my mind.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. That, the state, Illinois is the first state to adopt this through legislative action. Every other state that has adopted recreational cannabis has done it through a ballot referendum. And then the people make a decision, and then the state has to catch up. And they have to create, usually they're given like 6 months to create a whole legal structure. The Illinois legislature decided that it wanted to proceed with this. Would it have made this decision if Illinois' state budget was not in the shape that it's in? We can discuss that counterfactual if you'd like. I don't think that they would. If they don't start seeing the projection, if they don't start seeing the revenue that is being discussed, would they come in and preempt local authority to kind of artificially or kind of juice the market a little bit? I think there'd be a big political cost of doing that. Because when you're seeing opposition to this in places like Naperville, you're seeing people say, people can do what they want, but we don't want it sold in our community. I'm not going to tell my neighbor what to do. And I think that you get a lot of pushback on that. But I don't have a crystal ball either.
On the restricting the home growth, or the ability to somewhat restrict that, can you we went over that pretty quick, that's something that may affect us one way or another?
Yeah. So one of the biggest fears from law enforcement was that in some states where home grow was left completely unrestricted, or even there were some restrictions that were kind of gained. For instance, I believe it was in Washington, where everyone was allowed 5 plants, but if you didn't use your 5 plants, you could kind of give that credit over to your friend, and his friend could give it to him, and his cousin could give it to him, and suddenly you got 150 plants in somebody's basement. There were also some, I don't know if they're apocryphal, but anecdotal stories about cartels coming in and setting up grow. I've not seen a lot of evidence of that. 5 plants is a pretty small amount, and it's limited to registered qualifying patients. I talked to the legislative sponsors about whether you could have people who are doing that register with the village to let them know that they're doing it. One of the issues there is that if someone has a medical card, that's medical information, and forcing someone to disclose that could conceivably have implications. So I don't know if that was really considered when that came out. We're hoping to have some more guidance, actually, from the legislature or from the Department of Public Health on that.
Well, any other questions?
It's all one more, this is all still a cash-based business,
Yeah.
right? Really insured bank accounts, you can't deposit any money, which creates other secondary issues potentially.
So you are correct. Nationally chartered banks, FDIC insured financial institutions, will not bank these businesses. Some state chartered banks do, and a number of the cannabis businesses in Illinois work with, I think there's 2 of them down in Springfield, state chartered banks that do, so they're not just sitting on cash and they're not going to bring in a bunch of 20s to pay their property taxes or their water bill. And some credit unions as well. The dispensary that I went to, they literally had 2 ATMs on the sales floor. People walked up, got their cash out, walked 5 paces, bought their product, handed over the cash. I assume the cash didn't go back into the ATMs. But that is a concern. What most of these businesses do, because they have to keep their product actually in a sealed vault at night, they have their cash and product in a sealed vault at night, and they try and not keep anything on site, on premises, for any longer than they need to.
So when it comes time to remit their taxes, right, everything we just looked at, how does that?
Can you remit in
I didn't sell
cash?
anything.
But can you remit in
Well,
cash?
it's up to the state.
These places,
It's so heavily regulated, so that's not possible.
they deposit it with the state chartered institutions, and they'll write checks from there. The state chartered institutions are allowed to bank. And this is one of those things that's definitely a concern. I do think that especially if New York and New Jersey go for legalization, you're going to have about 45% of Americans living in a state where this is legal. MasterCard and Visa are going to want to get in on this. So, and not to be facetious, but I do think that this is a problem that will solve itself. It is definitely an issue right now.
It's just not solved.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, right now, the banks won't even give CBD oil places an ability to charge. Everything has to be cash.
Yeah. And CBD is not even really regulated. It's a very strange gray area. So
when it comes into the drug end of it, it is going to, in my opinion, it would bring in a lot of problems. You are dealing with a lot of cash, you're dealing with a lot of drugs. I don't know. I'm not a fan of this, especially when I'm reading how they break down the money on this for the state. By the time they get done with everything that they put amounts on, it's going back to the guy that sold them in the first place. And what is the question with it? Because most of the stuff is going to the state.
yeah.
So, I mean, the benefit to us is, I think, a lot of headaches. The benefit to the state just depends on how they spend the money once they get it.
And the sponsors just came out and gave more guidance to the local municipalities and said, don't be greedy right out of the gate. You might want to wait a few years before you enact your full 3%. After they piled on 40%.
I asked them why.
45 to 49.
But they told us, don't be greedy, maybe go for 1% in the first 3 years.
But I mean, if you look at the numbers that they had in there, it was 40 to 49% right off the top. And then when they started breaking down the remainder, well, first of all, you don't know what they're going to charge because it says, you know, where will the revenue go? Regulating state agencies, agricultural, ID, PR, EOR, cost gets paid first. Second, it goes to funds supporting expungement of minor cannabis convictions allocated from the state's attorney and possible law enforcement. Then from there goes remainder, 2% DHS, 8% LGCD, 25% to fund program, 10% to the budget stabilization fund, 35% to the general revenue fund. Hell, by the time it's done, there's nothing left for anybody except the state sucked it up and you got the So I mean, to me, it just doesn't make any sense. And if you guys want, I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just telling you that's my opinion on it. If you decided that you want to go with it, I think I would do one of those, let's see. That's the same thing we did with the gaming. And look how bad it is. It keeps trying to get out of the game. And that's something that I don't worry so much about. Most of the people don't let anything else, so there's not a lot of cash are walking out. But when you have this,
Yeah, to your point, I've said that all along. The gaming is, I get gaming and I get why it's there, but we get the smallest portion of the money, but we get 100% of the local problems. So if there are problems, they end up in this room and they end up at our feet. We end up with that. Nobody's going down to talk to Speaker Madigan or the governor about a local problem. We get all of the pushback and very little of the money. I think that would be the same thing. Sorry, Frank.
No.
so if I go
No, the only other question I had is, as you're advising clients, is there potential negatives long-term to opting out now? Does it handcuff you? I don't see where it does, right? So I don't see where the incentive is if you don't get in now, other than market-based things. And I think Trustee Gray is probably right. Lots of this money has already been spent and earmarked on infrastructure and budget. And so if this is opted out at the level that it seems to be opted out at, will it be a politically tough thing? Yes, but lots of these dollars are already spent, and they're going to have to come get the dollars at some point, however they're going to do it. But there's no negative to opting out where you handcuff yourself from a legal standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no risk to that.
Yeah. And many of the communities that have opted in are opting in because they literally have businesses knocking on their doors, and specific ones. And so for them, it's not just a theoretical. You are not, under the current structure, in any way bound by a decision to either say that we don't want these, to impose a possible moratorium on these, say you're going to revisit it in 12 months. I think all of those are viable options.
Last thing, and I may have missed this, but when we talk about recreational versus medical and taxation, what's that level on the medical? You said it was a drastic difference?
Yeah, it's between 40 to 45% if you're a recreational. If I come up to the same counter with my medical card, it's 1.25%.
That's different.
Yeah. Might be worth a trip to the doctor for some people.
Okay, this was just discussion, so there was no vote on it, but I mean, it's something that we should think about and we should bring it back to the board to say either yes or no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Is there any old business? Is there any new business? The next item is executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session for purposes of discussing executive session minutes, real estate, and pending litigation?
So moved.
Second. Second. Trustee Swees, Trustee Berry, Trustee Swees, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay.